Tonight at the Centennial Concert Hall, beginning at 7:30 p.m., the National Arts Centre Orchestra, led by Alexander Shelley and joined by pianist Jan Leszecki, are in Winnipeg to perform at the latest stop on the nationwide NACO Canada 150 tour. Ahead of that performance, NAC Orchestra conductor and music director Alexander Shelley has joined me here in the Classic 107 studios. Good afternoon.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, a pleasure having you. So, as I understand it, you've been to Winnipeg before.
I have, only the once, and I wasn't performing. I was meeting some of the NAC extended family, so many of the supporters and donors of the NAC are also based here in Winnipeg. I'm thinking of the Buellers or Gail Asper or the Susan Glass, for example, and her husband. And I was out here talking to them a little bit about the vision that we have for the coming years at the NAC, and I got to know the city a bit, and it's beautiful. It wasn't as windy last time I came,
but it's
gusty. Been pretty impressive the last couple of days, yeah.
And you also have a really strong engagement with the Sistema program as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky, I guess it's now 7 years ago, to go down to Venezuela for the first time and work with the Sistema orchestras there. I worked with the Simon Bolivar Youth Orchestra. There's two of them, A and B as they were called back then, and got to see the Sistema working there firsthand, fell in love with it, went back a couple of times, and I've seen across the country here during our tours and during the work I've been doing the last couple of years, there's great work going on in that area, Sistemas in different parts of the country. And when I came out here last time, I met with the boys and girls of Sistema Winnipeg and their amazing teachers. And this was, of course, all founded and is run by Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, our friends here, who've done something very special with that. I must commend them on the work that they've done. But I got to work with them a year ago when I was here, and then yesterday I went and met with them again, and it's lovely to see how it continues to progress and grow.
Why is that element of outreach and community engagement, both with the youth and with those established here in town, why is that such an important part of the NAC and the orchestra's mandate?
Well, I mean, my predecessor as music director, Pinka Sukuman, he grew the education side of the NAC Orchestra's work greatly and did a huge amount of work on developing young artists. We have a program they're called the Young Artists Program, where we get some of the finest instrumentalists from around the world coming to Ottawa, training with great musicians. And there was also a building of the outreach and community work. And I'm delighted that we're able to build on that amazing foundation that he and the orchestra laid. Because to answer your question, it's one thing to go to a city and do a concert. And that's great. And we can present works that we've commissioned. We can present great Canadian artists like Jan and great music played by our great orchestra. But for me, if you say, why are we the National Arts Centre Orchestra? What is a National Arts Centre for? Why does it receive government subsidy? What is our mandate? Then for me, there's a very strong mandate to partner and work with as many communities around the country as possible, to say this is a resource not just for Ottawa, this is a resource for everybody. So when we tour somewhere, I want us to go to schools. I want us to go to the Sistema program. I want us to talk to the great local orchestras and say to them, how can we partner with you? How can we work together with you to augment the great work you're already doing? And it's at that, if you will, sort of grassroots level of being face-to-face with an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or their teacher, that you also get a true sense of how the community functions and what would be useful. And it's not just within classical music. I want to just sort of mention that. Last night we presented the NAC a concert at Thunderbird House, Indigenous Voices Rising, which was all amazing Indigenous pop and folk artists. And that was wonderful to hear. And we want to partner with musicians, whether they're classical, whether they're folk, whether they're world music, pop, and we want to work with them, to support them and their projects, and to celebrate this nation's art.
It definitely is a most noble cause, of course. And before we get to talking about today's program, I think our listeners and mostly my own curiosity would be at least a little bit disappointed if I didn't bring up the family.
Right.
So I'm just curious. I mean, you're the son of two celebrated, world-renowned concert pianists.
Yeah.
Music must have been a first language. Did you have a choice?
I've been asked that before,
Yeah.
and honestly, I think one doesn't know.
Of course.
I guess if my parents had been hockey players, I there's a good chance hockey might have become my career. I don't know. All I can say is, yes, it was my first language. It's sort of before, I was telling some of the kids at the Sistema program yesterday that before I could say words, I was definitely playing notes on the piano. And there are embarrassing pictures of me in nappies, or diapers, playing. But I tell you, I mean, it was a blessing, of course, but it was also very useful to have parents who are in the industry, because they, through their own lives and through seeing so many musicians over the years, knew also that it is a vocation, and it is a profession then that is very, very demanding. There's a huge amount of competition. You have to be merciless with yourself, and you have to be incredibly dedicated. So they always said to me, look, we're delighted you love music, and we're delighted that you play instruments, and it's part of your life, and of course it's part of your life growing up with it. But you have to be sure that it's what you want to do for a living, because it can go any way. I have many friends. One of my closest friends in Germany who I study with, he's a great guitarist, and he's a very kind of hard-working guy, very applied. But his aspiration to become one of the great solo guitarists of the world, it didn't quite happen the way he hoped it would, because sometimes it's also doors opening and doors closing at the right time or the wrong time, and luck, like in any career, plays a big role. So you have to be completely committed to the thing and be in love with it. And I think having it as my first language and seeing it around me probably helped me find that commitment.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And I mean, it is a real grind, like you were saying. You have to be able to adapt. I mean, in those years since, a lot has gone on. I mean, you chose the path of conducting, and you've guest conducted with orchestras around the world. I'm not going to list them all. You're the music director of the National Arts Centre Orchestra and the principal associate conductor of the Royal Philharmonic, correct?
In London, yeah.
And the Nuremberg Symphony Orchestra as well.
I just stopped that this summer, so I was there for 8 years as music director in Nuremberg, yeah.
And so, I mean, with all of that going on and all the guest conducting, what makes you tick? What drives you as an individual?
Well, I mean, despite the fact that I grew up in this family where music was there all the time, or maybe because of it, I'm aware of what an enormous privilege it is to be able to lead this life, to have your passion and your hobby, the thing you would do of your own volition as much as you could if someone let you, to be paid for that, to go and work with the best in the world, to get to travel around the world and to talk about it, to be an advocate for it, to proselytize for music around the world. I know what a privilege that is. And as I said, it is my passion and my hobby. So no one has to make me sit down at a table and study a score. No one has to make me passionate about going out on stage and working with an orchestra. And I know that there are many people who get up in the morning and they say, oh, another day at work. It's a means to an end. So that gives me a lot of energy every day, I have to say, because it could have gone any other direction. I could be the same person and have not had certain opportunities that I had, and my life would look very different. So I feel very blessed, I guess, is the way to put it.
And like you said, passion breeds passion, right? And that passion kind of can translate across to young programs in Sistema, to young children in Sistema programs, or whoever it happens to be. So again, I think we're just so thankful to have you here in Winnipeg, conducting the NACO, and this is should be a great performance presented by the WSO. So you're joined in tonight's performance by a Canadian phenom of the piano, Jan Leszecki. You've performed together before?
We have. We've actually performed the Schumann together, which we're doing tonight. That was a season or two ago. Chopin Piano Concerto as well. And he's an old friend of the National Arts Centre Orchestra. And actually, I've known him for many, many years because my father used to teach him. He used to come to our house.
They've collaborated before too, right? Yeah.
He used to come to our house on a fairly regular basis over the years when he was much younger and work with Dad. Dad was never his teacher per se, but Dad heard him.
Things,
Dad heard him once and thought he's a huge talent, which he is. And so they met, and then they recorded the Chopin Piano Concertos together with my father conducting, and that won, I think, a Diapason d'Or or something prestigious, and was a sort of notch in his belt, so to speak. So he's amazing, and I can't wait for this tour where he's our soloist.
Right. What draws you to his playing?
Oh, many things. He's firstly a big virtuoso. I mean, he can get around all the notes. He has a lovely sound, a very beautiful sound, and he also has. Now, it may sound like a strange thing to say, but he has an uncomplicated and unaffected relationship to music. So he doesn't. When you hear him play, you don't hear him in the way. You don't hear him interpreting. You hear the music coming to life. And I say that might be a strange thing to say, but that is actually more difficult to do than it sounds. To interpret and to make a statement and to have a point of view about a piece of music without it sounding all the time like it's Jan performing or it's like Alexander conducting, but rather for people to think about Schumann, think about his work, or think about Dvorak's symphony. So he's a very natural musician, putting it a different way.
I think what's really interesting to me in this program that you guys have created here is the idea of world, be it a macro world or a micro world. I mean, with the Dvorak and with the Stasio piece. Yep. I'm curious how the Schumann works into it.
Well, the Schumann was a wonderful vehicle also for Jan, and was just a work that we felt would be a nice addition for the audience. So the Dvorak in the first half, the New World Symphony, this idea of a great composer from the old world coming over here, and then in this sort of seminal symphony, putting down his musical reaction to this new place, this new space, works as a mirror to I Lost My Talk at the end of the program, which I can talk about a little bit in a moment, which is all about an encounter of a different kind and a story to do with the new world of a different kind. And we wanted then in between that to have Jan here as a great world and Canadian artist, and also to have a work that for the audience would be deeply appealing and would showcase his artistry. So that's first and foremost what the Schumann is about.
Yeah, it's a great kind of in between, right? It just offers you this moment of beautiful color and tenderness as well.
Absolutely.
And so it's his only concerto as well,
It's
right?
his only piano concerto.
Concerto,
he wrote it.
concerto,
Cello concerto, violin concerto. He wrote, but it's one of the great pieces. Yeah. I love it. I'm already looking forward to tonight because of it. It's exhilarating and beautiful. Yeah.
And you mentioned the Dvorak, which is of course this masterpiece, influenced by his time spent in the U.S. And I mean, it's a work known, I'm sure, to many of our listeners, either by name or by tune. Yeah. But then the music of Canadian composer John Stasio. Yeah. I want to spend the rest of our time together, if you don't mind, talking about this work.
Sure.
It's multidisciplinary. It's inspired by the poetry of Mi'kmaq elder Rita Joe, and it brings together video and spoken word. Can you tell me a little bit about the work's origin story?
Okay, yeah. So what I'll do is backtrack slightly to a year or two before I started my tenure as music director. So I started in 2015, and this would have been around 2013. We were talking about the first few seasons of mine and programming, and looking towards this year, 2017, the sesquicentennial, this auspicious moment in the history of the country. And about a whole load of things, the mandate of the NAC Orchestra wanting to be an ever greater hub for creative artists and creating a space for them that they could work and experiment in. We raised a lot of money towards what's called our Creation Fund, and the Creation Fund is this big pot of money to give to Canadian artists to support their projects. So we had this in mind, and it was part of my learning process about Canada and Canadian art. We were having this discussion: what is Canada? What is Canadian? And so I started reading. We started having discussions. Maple syrup and moose and Mounties and but of course we were looking for, ultimately and paradoxically, I suppose, universals. What are universals in the Canadian story that transcend any particular place or any particular era? What are they? And I was given books as welcoming presents. Alice Munro's set of short stories, Dear Life, and I was Googling and reading and surfing the web, and we were working towards this big project that we wanted to create, a show that would be immersive, around 85 minutes, that showcased new music completely. I wanted to do that. And I wanted it to be the feeling like being in the cinema for 80 minutes, of having an experience that had an arc and a narrative. And we ended up creating 4 works, one of which was I Lost My Talk. Now, this poem by Rita Jo was something I just stumbled across when I was researching Indigenous art and culture. And it is a short poem that describes in very few words her experience of being sent to Shubenacadie Residential School. In her words, losing her talk, losing her identity. And at the end, she extends this arm of trust and generosity and says, let me teach you about me now. And this brief poem, I knew very little about her or the residential school experience, but it jumped out off the page to me. And so we ended up engaging with this. We said, what could we do with this? And this is, of course, a very sensitive issue, quite rightly so. We reached out to her family, who are on Eskasoni Reserve, talked to them about it. They were immediately on board with us. We approached John Astasio, we approached the choreographer Santi Smith, Donna Fior, the great director who lives in Stratford but works all over the place. She was already our creative producer for this, and she worked with John Astasio, with Santi Smith, the choreographer, put together an Indigenous group of dancers. We had Barbara Willis-Sweet, the great Canadian filmmaker, come and film that choreography in Perry Sounds. We have Monique Mojica, the great Indigenous actress, who's with us on tour. She stands on stage and speaks the words of Rita Doe, and she's also in the ballet dancing, so you see her both on stage and in this film. And John Astasio wrote this great score, and what we have is her poem interwoven in his symphonic picture, which is about 21 minutes long. And then above the orchestra, in tonight's performance, and around the orchestra in the full show that we created, you have this video. And it tells the story of Rita Jo, her experience at residential school, and is hopefully a work which speaks to people, which asks questions, which has an element of catharsis, because her poem does have that, but also talks about an issue and engages with an issue which is, for all of us, very important, I think.
And I want to talk just briefly about that. I mean, like you said, it was part of a broader project with arts and reconciliation. And tonight's performance in Winnipeg is taking place at the Centennial Concert Hall on Treaty 1 land in the homeland of the Métis Nation. And this idea, much like you alluded to, of reconciliation is something that we as Canadians are currently struggling with. And I think it's very appropriate that, given this performance is happening tonight in the midst of a long overdue controversial inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is happening in Winnipeg. And like you mentioned in the poem, in her writing, it's short, it's sweet, and I think what really stands out is the compassion. And it concludes with, "So gently I offer my hand and ask, let me find my talk so I can teach you about me." As someone who's not from Canada, what has this work, this immersive, powerful work, taught you as the conductor?
You picked out exactly the line. I was asked yesterday by some of the kids at Sistema, what's my favorite bit of the poem? And that was the thing that stood out. When I first read it, I didn't know her personal history other than what I read in that poem. But I spoke briefly a moment ago about universals. Repression is something that in one way or another is in every society and culture somewhere. Resistance in all its different forms is in cultures all around the world. Pain, suffering, but generosity is one of the most valued gifts in humanity. This idea of generosity, of forgiveness, of growing past something. And for me, at a time when the truth and when we started this project, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was still underway. They were still working. In this short poem, you saw the heart and the generosity and the forgiveness that speaks volumes of her and her people, frankly. That she was capable back then, when she wrote this, of saying, "Gently let me extend you my hand so I can teach you about me." Such a beautiful sentiment, and such a mature, wise, kind sentiment. And that jumped out of me, because in a very different context, you're saying, you're quite right, I'm a Brit coming and learning about this. In a very different context, my mum is Irish and Catholic, my dad is English and Protestant, and I grew up with IRA in in London, my hometown. And it was evident to me from a young age, even though I had some relations who kind of empathized with what the IRL were doing and the British English relations who didn't, it was obvious to me that much, much wrong had been done. And the step now in the England back then was to say, please admit that wrong was done. On the British side, say it. Say wrong was done. And say we're sorry for that. And say but we cannot now change that. What we can do is apologize, admit it, recognize all the errors were made, and step forward hand in hand and say, how can we build a just society now? Now, that's a different context over in the UK, but I see how in Canada, peu à peu, and also through the strength and generosity of the indigenous peoples here, that is happening, and it's a wonderful moment to observe and be in any tiny way part of. If we can be a force for good, then that's great.
And you speak of that generosity, and it's growing, and it's living, and I think that's one of the fascinating things to me about music is the fact that even though some of these works were written 200 years ago, and we see busts of these composers, they were real living people as well. And this is a very recent work. Has the work grown since its premiere? I know you've taken it to Cape Breton. I know you've moved it. Has it adapted? Has it grown?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was an amazing experience when we took it to Eskasoni and performed it for them. And I think for us performers, having gone to her community, Perry Bellegarde was there. You know, the chief of Eskasoni Reserve was there. Her family was there. Many of her relations were there. The whole community was in the hockey stadium, which they drained, and you know, and it was live streamed. To have been there and to have sort of eyeball to eyeball performed this piece, talked about it, be received by them the night before. They did a feast for us. They performed for us. That matured, I think, our understanding of what this work meant, our understanding of what her community is and was. They call her the gentle warrior there.
They do.
Which is beautiful, and it's very true. It's a beautiful description of her personality. So I think that I hope our performance of it has deepened because we as people, through our exposure to her story, her community, her home, have hopefully also deepened. I know that I've learned, and I've been deeply touched by that experience. And I hope that if ever anything similar is happening in the world that I could do anything about through having been exposed to her story in this way, I would be quicker to stand up and say this shouldn't be happening. I hope that of myself. You never know when you're in these positions. But I think we have deepened and matured as people through the story, and therefore hopefully the performance too.
and then the last thing I'm going to ask you, thank you again. You've been so generous with your time.
No, of course.
What do you hope audiences take away from tonight's performance with the Dvorak, with the Schumann, and with this beautiful work inspired by Rita Joe's writing?
Well, firstly, I hope that every moment of the concert is for them an experience that is enriching and fulfilling. I hope that the sounds are beautiful for them. I hope that those of them that care to think about music and not just experience, that they also feel that there was integrity in the way things were performed and presented. I hope they feel that it's a celebration of the very, very high standards that this country has in terms of its culture. You know, this orchestra here, Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, National Arts Centre Orchestra, Vancouver, all around the country, Toronto, Montreal, there are world-class orchestras and institutions working very hard. I hope that they feel that it's a celebration of that, and of Canadian creators, John Estacio, of Donna Fior, of Santi Smith, of Monique Mojica, and of Rita Joe. And I hope that whole sort of experience in whatever it is, 2 hours tonight, sends them home enriched, and that also through Dvorak's prism, his view of the world that he expresses through sound, Schumann's life, the music that he expresses, and then through John Estacio, that they also find succor, that there's, when they wake up in the morning tomorrow, that they say, hey, you know, those three creative artists have given me something, even if it's intangible. So I just hope they have a great time.
Well, it most certainly should be a wonderful time and a thought-provoking and powerful performance. So thank you again for coming by the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Alexander Shelley is the music director and conductor of the National Arts Centre Orchestra, and they're in Winnipeg to perform tonight at the Centennial Concert Hall with pianist Jan Leszecki. The show is at 7:30 p.m. For more information and tickets, head to wso.ca.